Okay, so you want to own an oil refinery. Buy some land, build some towers, turn crude into gasoline, watch the cash roll in every time someone fills up their tank. Here's the strange part. Nobody has built one of these from scratch in the United States since 1976. Not because the business stopped being profitable, because it became one of the hardest businesses on earth to start, and one of the easiest to lose $1 billion in, B, not M, in a single afternoon. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why this country hasn't built a new refinery in 50 years, how a refinery actually makes its money on something most people have never heard of, why the same machine that prints cash in one season can lose money in the very next one, and why the business everyone blames for high gas prices is more often than not barely breaking even. Refineries come in three sizes, and they are three completely different businesses. A small, simple topping refinery, just enough to separate crude into basic fractions, runs you $2 to $3 million if you're buying something tiny and outdated. You get a glorified distillation column and a permit nightmare. A real mid-size refinery, the kind that actually processes useful volume, costs $5 to $15 billion depending on complexity. The more conversion units you add, hydrocracking, catalytic cracking, reforming, the more expensive and the more profitable it gets. And then there's the project that just put oil refining back in the news. In March 2026, America First Refining broke ground in the port of Brownsville, Texas. The total commercial deal is worth $300 billion over 20 years, anchored by Reliance Industries, the Indian conglomerate run by Mukesh Ambani. But that headline number isn't the construction cost. The actual refinery in its first phase costs around $1.2 billion to build just around 50,000 barrels a day of capacity. Full build-out across three phases gets you to roughly 164,000 barrels a day. This is the first refinery built from scratch in America since Gerald Ford was president and gas cost 59 cents a gallon. Why did it take 50 years? The building was never the hard part. The permitting was. Environmental review alone can take a decade. Air quality permits, water discharge permits, community impact studies, federal and state overlap. The rule of thumb in this industry for the last several decades has been simple. It's easier to expand an existing refinery by 50,000 barrels a day rather than build a new one anywhere in the country. So that's exactly what everyone did instead for 50 years. Now the question that actually matters: where does the money come from? It's not the price of gas. It's the gap. The industry calls it the crack spread, and once you understand it, every headline about gas prices makes a different kind of sense. Here's the idea. A refinery buys crude oil. It cracks that crude into gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. The crack spread is the difference between what the refinery pays for the crude and what it sells the finished products for. The standard way Wall Street measures this is called the 3-to-1 crack spread. 3 barrels of crude go in, 2 barrels of gasoline, and 1 barrel of diesel come out. The spread between those two numbers, measured in dollars per barrel, is the refinery's gross margin. A healthy crack spread historically runs $10 to $20 a barrel. During supply shocks, wars, hurricanes, refinery outages, it can blow out past $30 to $40. And this is the part that breaks people's brains. A refinery doesn't actually want high oil prices. It wants a wide gap between oil prices and product prices. Those are two completely different things. When crude oil spikes because of a war in the Middle East, the price at the pump usually follows fast. But the refinery's cost of buying that same crude also just spike. If gasoline prices catch up quickly, the refiner's margin barely moves. If gasoline prices lag behind for a few weeks before catching up, the refiner makes enormous, almost unfair profits during that gap. Earlier this year, when conflict with Iran pushed Brent crude towards $112 a barrel, Gulf Coast refiners running on cheaper WTI crude but selling it to global product prices saw their margins widen sharply almost overnight, for reasons that had nothing to do with how efficiently they were running their plants. That's the entire business model in one sentence. A refinery is not in the business of oil. It's in the business of the gap between oil and gasoline, and that gap can move for reasons completely outside of its control. Now, the part nobody puts in headlines. Refineries don't make one product. they make 5 or 6 simultaneously from the same barrel of crude. And the profitability of the whole operation depends on getting that mix right. Out of 1 barrel of crude, a refinery is pulling gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, naphtha, and liquefied petroleum gas all at once, all priced differently, all moving independently in their own markets. Gasoline demand peaks every summer, during what the industry literally calls driving season, from June through September. That seasonal surge can widen gasoline cracks by $3 to $8 a barrel above winter levels. Diesel runs the opposite pattern, driven by trucking and farming and industrial output, more stable year-round, but it spikes during planting season and cold winters when home heating oil draws from the same barrel. This means a refinery is essentially running 5 different businesses inside one building, hedging 5 different product markets all day, every day, just to protect the overall number. And refiners don't just sell at whatever the market gives them that day, they hedge. A refiner can sell crack spread futures months in advance, locking in a margin now, regardless of where prices move later. In one real industry example, a refiner locked in a 3-to-1 crack spread of $28 a barrel for the third quarter of 2026, guaranteeing that margin no matter what crude or gasoline did between now and then. It's less like running a factory and more like running a hedge fund that happens to own some very large metal towers. Here's the part that explains why your gas price has almost nothing to do with the gas station down the street and everything to do with which refinery your state happens to sit near. The Gulf Coast is the center of American refining. Texas and Louisiana alone process millions of barrels a day, tightly clustered, feeding pipelines that crisscross the entire country. If one refinery there goes down for maintenance, 6 others are close enough to pick up the slack. The region is, in effect, one giant shared safety net. The West Coast doesn't have that. California is geographically isolated from the rest of the country's refining network. And on top of that, the state requires its own specially blended gasoline to meet stricter air quality rules, a blend that almost nobody else in the country produces. That combination means California can't simply truck in spare capacity from Texas the way other regions can. When a California refinery shuts down, there is no neighboring backup. And right now, 2 of them are shutting down at once. Phillips 66 closed its Los Angeles refinery at the end of 2025. Valero is closing its Benicia refinery in 2026. Together, those 2 facilities represent close to a fifth of all the in-state refining capacity California has left, dropping the state to just 7 refineries serving roughly 40 million people. Economists at UC Davis modeled what happens next and project California gas prices could rise by over $1 a gallon by the time both closures fully hit the market. More aggressive estimates from other analysts run even higher, into multiple dollars a gallon, depending on how much the remaining refineries can ramp up production to fill the gap. Industry groups point to the cost of operating under the state's environmental and fuel blend rules as the reason the refiners are leaving. State officials and outside economists dispute how much of the price increase that actually explains versus how much comes from the geography problem itself, losing capacity in a market that can't easily import more. Either way, the lesson for anyone thinking about this business is the same. A refinery isn't just a piece of industrial equipment, it's regional infrastructure. And when regional infrastructure disappears, the math doesn't get redistributed evenly across the country. It gets dumped entirely on whoever was standing closest to the building that just closed. So with guaranteed demand, locked-in hedges, and a business nobody else is allowed to build, why are refineries actually one of the worst performing parts of the entire oil industry right now? 2 forces are squeezing this business at the same time, and almost every refinery in America is dealing with both. Force 1. The margin has been collapsing for years. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, crack spreads for gasoline and diesel had been declining steadily since 2022. Downstream earnings, the refining side of the big oil companies, dropped roughly 50% in 2024 compared to the year before, and were running about 60% below where they sat in 2022. Refining capacity itself is shrinking. LyondellBasell shut its Houston refinery. Phillips 66 closed its Los Angeles facility. Together, those closures pulled over 400,000 barrels a day of capacity off the market. And the longer-term outlook is worse. Industry analysts project U.S. and global refining capacity could shrink by 10 to 30% over the next decade as electric vehicles and alternative fuels chip away at gasoline demand specifically, even as jet fuel demand stays resilient. This is the part that surprises people. The thing the public blames for high gas prices is, on average, one of the least profitable links in the entire chain. Force 2. The building can kill people, and when it does, it's catastrophic. On March 23, 2005, an explosion at BP's Texas City refinery, at the time the third largest in the country, killed 15 workers and injured more than 170 others. The cause? A blowdown stack was overfilled with flammable liquid during a unit startup. A spark from an idling truck ignited the vapor cloud. Property damage alone ran $200 million, worth over $330 million today. The refinery had posted over $1 billion in profit the year before the explosion. It was making roughly $100 million a month right up until the disaster. What came after defines the real risk of this industry. BP pled guilty to a felony violation of the Clean Air Act, a $50 million criminal fine, at the time the largest ever issued under that law. A separate $21 million OSHA fine, also a record. Later, an $87 million fine when follow-up inspections found the company still hadn't fixed the hazards. By the time all the settlements, fines, and mandated safety spending were totaled, BP had paid out more than $2 billion connected to a single afternoon at a single facility, on top of more than $1 billion the company spent on safety upgrades afterward. One bad startup procedure, 15 lives, $2 billion. That's the liability sitting underneath every single refinery in this industry every single day it operates. Step back for a second. A refinery is a paradox the same way a casino is. It sits at the center of a product everyone on Earth needs every single day, with government-mandated scarcity on its side. Nobody's allowed to easily build a new competitor, and it still runs on margins so thin and volatile that the entire industry's profitability could be wiped out by a seasonal shift in diesel demand or a hurricane shutting down the Gulf Coast for a week. Crude oil going in is the same. The 5 products coming out move independently in 5 different markets all day long. You're not really refining oil, you're managing 5 overlapping bets at once and getting paid only for the gap between what you paid for the bet and what the market gives you back. 2 scenarios, real numbers. Scenario 1, a small topping refinery. Tiny processing capacity, minimal conversion units, maybe a few thousand barrels a day. Initial cost in the low millions. In a strong crack spread environment, you can clear a real profit. In a weak one, you're running at break even or worse, with no scale to absorb a bad quarter. This is the entry-level version of the business. It lives or dies entirely on the spread, with zero room for error. Scenario 2, a Gulf Coast mega refinery. Multi-billion-dollar build, hundreds of thousands of barrels a day, full conversion capability, hydrocracking, catalytic cracking, the works. At a healthy $15 to $20 crack spread, a 250,000 barrel a day refinery is generating margin in the billions annually before operating costs. At a weak $5 to $8 spread, the same facility can be running close to break even at full capacity, even fully staffed, even doing everything right. Same building, same crew, same crude coming in the front gate. The difference between $1 billion a year and a break-even year isn't anything the refinery did. It's a number set by global crude markets and seasonal gasoline demand that the operator has almost no control over. That's why every serious player in the business hedges, because the only thing scarier than a thin margin is an unhedged thin margin in a year crude oil decides to move. In 1976, Marathon Oil finished construction on a refinery in Garyville, Louisiana. It was, at the time, just another refinery going up in a country that was building dozens of them. Nobody knew it would be the last one built from scratch in America for the next 50 years. That refinery is still running today. Expanded in 2009 for $3.9 billion, it now processes nearly 600,000 barrels a day, making it one of the largest in the country. For half a century, every single barrel of new refining capacity in the United States came from expanding buildings like that one, not from anyone building something new. The regulatory and political cost of a greenfield refinery was simply too high. Then, in March of 2026, that 50-year freeze broke. Ground gets broken this year at the port of Brownsville on the first new refinery built from nothing since Garyville. 20 years of contracts, 3 phases, engineered specifically to run on American shale oil instead of the imported heavy crude the rest of the Gulf Coast was built around decades ago. That is the actual economics of owning a refinery. It's not a business about oil. It's a business about a gap that opens and closes for reasons you don't control. Sitting inside a building so expensive and so regulated that almost nobody has tried to build a new one in 50 years. In a network so regional that losing just one of them can move the price at the pump for 40 million people who never thought about where their gasoline actually came from. Build it right, and you own one of the few machines on Earth that the entire modern economy cannot function without. Build it anywhere else, in anything less than the right conditions, and you'll find out exactly how thin that machine's margin really is. Usually in the same week, the headlines decide to ask why.